Here we go. Hello, welcome to this week's Jump webinar. For those of you who would find it helpful, we are going to be running live transcript on our webinar today, and you can find that option to switch the live transcript on the bottom of your screen. This is the last week of my spell hosting the Jump webinars, and I'll be handing the reins back to Howard next week. So no! Howard, Howard, from the car as you join us today, thanks for the opportunity to learn a new skill. I can tell you, it's not as easy as Howard makes it look. So this is our final webinar in the series on the topic of diversity, equity and inclusion. And as well as our usual Jump participants, Howard, Paul and I, Paul and Dave are with a client today and can't join us. Howard is joining us from the car. So as well as your normal hosts, I'm delighted to welcome back our guests. Joining us again this week are Joanne and Jackie. Joanne Lockwood, as I'm sure you already know, and for those of you who don't, Joanne is the founder and CEO of See Change Happens, a diversity, inclusion and belonging practice providing support to organisations and businesses. She previously spent time in the forces and in private banking before running her very own successful IT business, which at its peak employed 25 people. She took part in a Channel 4 documentary called The Making of Me, and according to her website, her mantra is smile, engage and educate. And she passionately believes that people are people, and no matter who they are, they deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. So welcome to you, Joanne.
Morning.
Accompanying Joanne is our next guest, and Jackie Handy describes herself as being on a mission to ensure everyone feels safe, valued and understood at work. Jackie spent 15 years as a very successful recruiter and now works through her company, Runway Global, supporting organisations to embed diversity, equity and inclusion into their leadership culture. She has a TEDx talk, which I really recommend you go and listen to, called The Exclusive Nature of Inclusion, that's been viewed over 25,000 times. And she's the author of a book called The Little Book of Belonging. Thank you both for participating in this webinar series. It's been amazing to listen to both of you sharing your insights, and we really have had some great feedback from our listeners. Pleasure. So this week, thanks Jackie. So in the webinars so far, we've talked about why DE&I is important. We've talked about what an inclusive culture actually is and how we create one in our organisations. Then we talked about working with our clients on their agenda and acting as true consultants with our clients. In the third webinar, we focused on candidates and ensuring that as organisations, we're fishing for our clients in deeper and wider pools for candidates. So this week, in the final of this series, we're finishing with an open Q&A. So we're putting our panelists and the Jump team on the spot with questions submitted from our LinkedIn audience and from those who've listened to the webinars so far. And we'd encourage anybody listening today, if you have questions, please pop them in the chat function. I will keep an eye on the chat function and try to make sure that we include your questions as we go along. So to get us going, so given the debate and the questions that we've had so far in the 3 webinars, what's the one thing that you would ask business owners to consider? So volunteers, or shall I pounce?
Pounce.
Pounce. Okay, Joanne, go for it.
As has been a recurring theme throughout, I think, all of the contributions we've given for the last 3 webinars, is that why. Yeah, that why question. Business owners and leaders need to consider why it matters to them individually, not just as a business, because I think we have to start with understanding our own personal why. Why do I value inclusion myself? Then the why of the business. Why does it matter to you as an organisation? And if you want to put an ROI, return on inclusion, as well as the moral case, that is perfectly valid. Don't be ashamed of seeing a business outcome, because profit isn't a dirty word and you need to be sustainable in order to continue your business. So anything you do in terms of inclusion should be seen as a positive asset to your business, not a cost or a distraction. It should be part of your core attributes. So finding your why of D&I, as I often say, should be the question you ask yourselves.
Thank you, Joanne. Jackie, do you want to give us your?
Of course, yeah, and really to build on what Joe's just said there, and that would be to look within first. And, you know, I've referred to this a few times as we've gone through this sort of webinar series. I think that, you know, we've talked a lot about, you know, what can recruiters do to influence their clients to support the external market. And I would say, well, make sure your own environment is sorted first, if that makes sense, because otherwise it appears so performative. And Joe is right in that, you know, the why of DE&I, and if that's a monetary financial why, then okay, so be it, just get started. But I think if you want that longevity of relationship with your client base, if you want that branding that says we are a trusted partner that is sincere and authentic in what we're doing, then you've got to go inwards before going outwards. And I really believe that. And just to, I suppose, give a very short acronym, if you like, but I would say have your map in place. And so the M of that would be have your mindset in place. So do you really want to change? And this really links to Joe's point about the why. You know, what are the benefits of you even bothering, right? So that's your mindset, getting that in place. I think the second thing then is the A, is the ability. Do you have the ability to change? Do you have the skills? Do you have the knowledge? Do you know where to start? And that's where people like Joe and I can come in, little plug for us, but you know, that's where we can come in to support you. And then the P, funnily enough, is preparation. So are you ready to start this journey? But also, are you ready for the result of this journey? Because things will change. So are you ready for what those changes will mean to your business and that of your clients that you serve? So I think, you know, keep that in mind, have your map in place and go within before you go outside.
Lovely, Jackie, thank you. That's lovely. It just made me think about the post I put on LinkedIn yesterday. I don't know if you saw my dinosaur. I was when we were in Paul and I were seeing a client in Leeds yesterday, and there's a animatronic dinosaur in the foyer as you walk through Leeds, and it's brilliant. So I stopped to video it because I thought I'd just share it with my family afterwards. And then as I was traveling back on the train, I was thinking, okay, there's got to be some way that I can turn this into a LinkedIn post, but dinosaurs such a negative connotation. And of course, which is what the post ended up being, right? And I think this links to what you're saying, Jackie. Dinosaurs are perceived as being, you know, dinosaurs can't change. Actually, what dinosaurs were is able to evolve, and they could evolve, and they dealt with change, and that's why they survived on the earth for 200 million years. So don't see people managing that. So but that whole piece about being prepared for change and being able to evolve and move forward is so important. And the reality is that DE&I is part of the evolution of humankind and of our businesses. And, you know, it's something we have to roll with. And I think I win a prize for getting dinosaurs into the webinar as well as onto my LinkedIn posts.
But Heather, you know, just unlike dinosaurs, DE&I ain't going away. You know, we were just saying this before. Well, at least I hope it isn't. You know, this is really the start point of this journey, isn't it? I think where organisations are waking up and realising that, you know, actually there are. And I don't think this is a business bonus. I think this is a business necessity for the businesses of the future to be mindful of the work that they're doing in this space.
100%. I think the other thing is we don't recognise what we are doing sometimes. And people see DE&I as being something different, something extra. But we're already doing it. We've already got our wellbeing programs. We're already worrying about other things we're doing in our career development, our leadership training, how we treat our staff. We're already doing a lot of this already. It's just wrapping it in a playbook or a framework that recognizes it so you can evidence it or use it in a more positive way. But I've spoken to an organization this morning and said, we don't know where to start. I said, well, have you done this? Oh yeah, we're doing about menopause awareness already. I go, well, that's part of DE&I. They say, oh, we've got a leadership framework. We're doing that. Put that in there. So sometimes what we need to do is just bundle up what you are doing and calling that your D&I framework and then bolting more stuff into it. And I think it's very rare for business today to be doing nothing. So don't assume you're doing nothing. You've already started this journey. It's about repackaging, just redefining it.
And do you know, if I can add to that as well, I think, again, it's such a valid point. And I think that for some reason, when, and, you know, we've had these conversations, haven't we, about, you know, who's engaging and so on and so forth. So we won't regurgitate that. But I do think that there is something when you start branding things as DE&I, then it just freaks some people out. You know, they just get a bit fearful, and for whatever reason, you know, it's not for me, they don't believe they've got work to do, or they want to just be in denial. Their biases are leading them to denying that there is anything to do. As Joe rightly says, you know, repackaging and so forth, and I'm working on something right now, for instance, that helps label it as the leadership development, the development of our people, and weave the DEI into that, rather than perhaps saying DEI and weave your leadership into that. So it's a subtle shift, because I guess really, if you're any kind of rapport building and so forth is about speaking that same language, helpful language, of course, and respectful language, but speaking that same language. So how can we continue to speak the same language, but just, as you said, Heather, evolve what we're doing to incorporate this as just a natural part of how we lead and how we do business? And I think the sooner we can get that into perspective and into place in our organizations, inwardly and then for our customer base, then the sooner we will find positive change.
I think what you've both said there, though, is really interesting. And sort of, as we look at it, you know, lots of business leaders are going to be scared of A, doing the wrong thing, B, not doing the right thing, and actually starting this process off. And I think what you're both saying is change is the worst thing that people can do, because change is really hard to, you know, implement. It's hard to govern. It's hard to make people change. And so I keep talking to my clients about even just simple recruitment process. It's not about changing the habit that they have now. It's about introducing a better habit that will eventually eat the old habit. And that's what we're talking about. And so it's about creating a new habit for people and driving those new habits into a business. So it's not about change, because I think change is what frightens people. It's about creating a completely new habit and creating a completely new culture within those businesses to then start to blossom. Where we talked about dinosaurs becoming extinct, and said we hope DE&I doesn't become extinct. Well, my view is it should do, because it should become the norm. Therefore, it is extinct in that sort of way. And
yeah, that we don't need to talk about it anymore, Howard. Yeah, that we don't need to talk about it anymore, because it's just become the way we do things. And we're inclusive as a natural order of things.
Yeah. So as a roving reporter, I'm going to sign out again.
It's that whole concept, isn't it, of you know, marginal gains, I guess, you know, those 1%, those incremental shifts. And yeah, Howard's right. I'm sure Joe echoes my sentiment when I say, you know, the day my role is redundant in this field will be a great day, actually. I sadly fear it might be a while, but nevertheless, you know, that's the day I really look forward to. Then on the other hand, I think we perhaps do need that continuous conscious awareness of what we're doing, not to finger point, not to accuse and that sort of thing, but to constantly evolve, to use your term again, to continuously evolve, because isn't that what any great business does anyway? In order to stay ahead of its competition and be the best version of itself.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we don't know what we don't know. So being open to listening to people who are involved in DE&I and understanding and challenging ourselves. And, you know, I've talked about DE&I for most of my career, but I've still learned things and thought of things differently from these webinars and being part of them. And it's challenged my thinking. I think, Paul, you said that earlier. I don't think we ever stop. Please.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, 100%. I think for me, just on a personal basis, and I mentioned this just prior to going live, you know, I think I've learned an awful lot, and it's been quite a topic of debate in the Sharp household. and as I shared with Jackie and Joanne, I shared some of this information, some of the learnings with 52 HRM students from Leeds University on Monday. So I think, it's really interesting. It's definitely opened my eyes up. I love the fact, I was just pondering on Joanne's comment about, profit isn't a dirty word, and, not being ashamed to chase the profit if that is your agenda. And I think, that sort of hit a bit of the light bulb moment for me, because I think last week I was skirting around it, if I'm being brutally honest with you, around, why, trying to find that why change. And if it is all about profit, is all about money, then I just want to re-emphasize this point. Clients are changing at a rate, clients' needs are changing at a rate of knots. And this isn't now just your Mars or your Procter & Gamble's or your AstraZeneca's. I'm going out for lunch with a HR director tomorrow of a law firm of employing about 60, 70 people. So, right in that SME sort of sweet spot. And she's asked me, can I put your brains about diversity and inclusion? Now, I'm not nowhere near an expert, but I'm sure she'll use me as a sounding board. So it just goes to show that it is now starting to, that ripple effect is getting wider and wider, and it's in affecting the economy more and more. The one thing I just, disagree with in terms of the change bit is the candidate bit for me, because that's where we need to, I think, turn the afterburners up. Because we source in traditional channels, we source candidates in a traditional way. From a DE&I perspective, organisations tend to measure the workforce once they're in the workforce. They don't measure how people get into the workforce. And I think that's where recruiters have got a really big role to play. And I work with a client in Manchester that does contact centre recruitment. He can tell his client exactly what the breakdown and makeup of all the candidates were that applied to the role, what happened when they went through the sifting, what happened when they went through the first interview, what happened when they got to the client, and what happened when they got to the offer stage. That, for me, is the way forward. We've got to be able to really break down the process before the candidates get into an organisation. And as I said at the start, if you want to differentiate yourself in the market, there's not many recruiters doing that. It's really easy to do if you've got a decent CRM. Really easy to do. It's not laborious, it's not manual. You just use the technology to capture that data and then report on it.
And trust me, everyone will be doing it. So, do you want to be first, or do you want to be a lagger? To be honest with you, and so I think you hit the nail on the head there. I read an article this morning talking about inwards and outwards. There are currently over 360,000 recruitment jobs live on LinkedIn right now. So this is for recruiters. So, this goes back to, perhaps our audience, who are recruitment leaders, who are now going to be scrabbling, if you like, to perhaps get some of this talent in. There's such an opportunity here, because there aren't going to be a whole host of experienced recruiters there waiting to come and join you necessarily. So firstly, I would say, well, who else then? If not an experienced recruiter, who else? Who else would have potentially the mindset, the aptitude, the attitude, the qualities that we would look for that represent our values and our brand? And then secondly, why would they come to us? Why would they come to us? Because increasingly, and we've heard this now for months and months and months, increasingly people are looking to work for organizations with purpose and a strong mission. So, if we're just going through the kind of old things of, hey, we go for a beer on a Friday and thinking that works for everyone, it works for me, to be fair, just in case people want to know, but it doesn't work for everyone, so if we're reliant on those old kind of, we've got a pool table, we've got beer, and so on and so forth, no, that's just not going to cut it for a lot of people, is it? So it's changing things. Again, it is change, but I prefer to call it evolve, actually, because I think that is a more sensible way of looking at it. Not dismissing the term change, but it almost feels more manageable to evolve.
And palatable.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
I think we have to recognise there is no magic bullet. There is no, here's the change strategy for everybody. You can't just whip it out and say, right, here we go, that's what we're doing. There's no one size fits all blueprint. And I talk about polarity in the same way we've got the Johari window, what we know about ourselves, what we don't know about ourselves. But think about polarity in terms of inclusion and diversity in the top right-hand quadrant. We're very inclusive, very diverse, versus not very and not very. What we're trying to do is we're trying to tend towards that upper right quadrant, away from the bottom left quadrant. And it's the direction of travel. It's not around what you're doing. It's about the intent and the travel and making sure you're showing progress. So you may not have every one of your work streams at the same speed or even started yet, but your intention in your direction of travel that you're communicating, you're authentic about, is to be more diverse, is to be more inclusive, is to create a better culture. So it's that positive polarity we're looking for and that direction of travel. And everybody can embark on that, because the first step is, let's do something. And that is an immediate light bulb on. We're going, we're set off.
Joanne, I love that. I love that because it's authentic too. And one of the worst things that you can do when you're hiring people is to claim something that's not factual. And so when they arrive, the reality doesn't match the sales pitch in the recruiting. Whereas what you're talking about being honest about that journey is wonderful. And that's absolutely about how we're going to attract the next generation of people
I
to come
equate
into
that
this
to
industry.
Computer game marketing. It's not actual game footage. This is kind of demo mode, isn't it? It's you go to the cinema and watch the latest action movie on the cinema screen. It says not actual game footage, and that's the interview process. This is not the character you're going to employ, and this is not what the scenery looks like when you get in the company. Objects in the mirror may seem closer than they really are. That kind of stuff. Yeah, no actual game footage. It's demo mode.
That's lovely. I like that a lot. That's great. So we have got a question in the chat box that I'd like to bring in, which will move us into a slightly different area. So one of the people who's joined us today talks about the Conservative Manifesto in 2019 was described as the most ambitious and transformative disability plan in a generation. Sadly, the plans, in the opinion of the person posting, says they didn't go far enough to ensure all employers were willing to bring in disabled candidates from different backgrounds, race, gender, etc., because of their lack of education or experience. It is all because of a lack of equality, diversity and inclusion training. During the pandemic, more disabled candidates found it hard to get positions. Why does the panel think this is? Is it because all leaders aren't trained to put it right for their clients?
I saw some stats a little while ago that showed the investment in various characteristics in terms of inclusion. And investment in disability or being accessible has consistently had a low level of investment over the last 20, 30 years, even through DE&i, etc. But yet you look at racism or racial inclusion, you look at LGBT, you look at gender, all those have had successful implementations of investment over the years, but disability inclusion has remained static. I don't have the answers to why. Maybe it's not sexy. Maybe the lobby is not there. Maybe the power is there. We think about where power and privilege lay. Generally, it's straight white men or gay white men. So maybe that's why we see LGBT and male type issues taking a priority. But disability, it doesn't have any powerful arguments. I don't understand why either. Maybe businesses see it as a cost. That reasonable adjustment, that workplace adjustment has a negative cost. It's more awkward, or there's that strong bias that we believe, we stereotype people with a disability as being less capable. We have that benevolence bias kicks in. Oh, they're there, poor little disabled person mentality still. So a lot of these things are kicking around in our heads, and I can't explain why we're not investing other than we aren't. And I've worked with a number of housing associations over the last 6 months, doing audits, going into them, looking at their stats, and they've got a low declaration rate of people with a disability. And I asked them about what they're doing for disability inclusion. And they said, well, nothing. We're just an equal opportunity employer. Everyone can apply. Well, when you're running contact centres, when you're working agilely from home, you'd think there was huge amounts of opportunities here to put some positive action focus on people with disabilities. Yet people aren't doing that. Yeah, people aren't doing that. Why not? I can't answer that question. All I can say is I can see evidence that people aren't doing it, backing up the question that Spencer asked. So how do we change that? We've got to bring it up the list. We've got to make it sexy, whatever it may be. Because I think statistically, all of us, when we think intersectionally, all of us can acquire a disability throughout our lives. All of us could have that life-changing accident. All of us could have that diagnosis of a condition or an illness. If not us, then our relatives or our partners. 1 in 6 of us will lose our hearing in some significant way over the course of our lifetime. I wear glasses. I'm overweight. There's a lot of things that are wrong with me. I don't identify as a disabled person, but I know that I can't walk that far. I struggle with stairs. So we all need to recognise that people have disabilities. Mental health. We're happy to talk about neurodiversity. Neurodiversity is sexy right now. It's become a sexy label. Why aren't wheelchair users sexy labels? Again, I don't have answers. I've just got questions.
And I think that's an important start, isn't it? That we need to get those questions asked and we need to get people thinking about it, because sadly, many people only start to think about how does somebody with a hearing impairment or a visual impairment get employment, and what are the challenges for them when they have personal experience of it, or they know somebody who has personal experience of it. And so the louder we can talk, to shout about it, and the more we can get people thinking about it and get it up the agenda, along with all of the other things that we look at with diversity and inclusion.
And you've also got the social model of disability. So it's the society, the workplace that makes someone disabled. So a person who's a wheelchair user isn't disabled in an environment that is fully accessible. They cease to be a disabled person when you have an accessible environment. So that's the objective, is to create accessible process, accessible environments, accessible whatever it may be, so that everybody has the same chance. Then the disability is no longer a factor in that person's life.
I saw
and that for me is where recruiters have got a role to play, because
absolutely
we can't change what Boris said in his manifesto. We can be careful who we vote for, but I'll avoid any political sort of thoughts and views creeping in here. But as recruiters, we can be really careful how we source and engage with candidates. And Spencer's point on the LinkedIn, I think, if you look on LinkedIn, sadly, the vast majority of recruiters follow the same template when they're advertising for roles. And this is why it turns candidates off. We have to flip this on the head, especially now because everybody's finding it hard to engage with candidates. And we have to try and source candidates and engage with them in a different way. And I think that's where recruiters have got a massive part to play, huge part to play. That bit we can influence.
I agree, Paul. And I think I said last week about this, if you're, first of all, we've talked about it over and over, but are all candidates on LinkedIn? Sometimes that's our own kind of recruiter hat thinking, oh, anyone's going to be on LinkedIn. They're not. So, to Joe's point, I saw a great quote which sums it up beautifully, that disability isn't the wheelchair, disability is the stairs, and so it just echoes that point. And I think I mentioned last time as well about, well, when recruiters are recruiting, and I'm talking about their own people first again, and then this can ebb out, if you like, into their own network of customers. But how are you presenting your adverts? Just written? Well, who can't access that? How are you going through your interview process? So it's not just thinking about who can, it's thinking about who can't, because then you can start thinking about, okay, well, how can we change it? And if that means that you engage with some specialists in the disability arena, then do that. Why wouldn't you do that? You engage with business consultants to develop your business strategy. So why wouldn't you do that? It's the same kind of principle. Joe kind of nailed it really in terms of that whole the statistics around it. And I read that 80% of people living with a disability we're not born with that disability. That's the level, and Joe raised the stat, the 1 in 6 about hearing, but if 80% of the population who become disabled we're not born with that disability. You understand where I'm going. And I think there's around 1 billion disabled people, or a lot of people anyway, in the world. That's a big portion. Don't quote me on the stats, by the way, just then, but I'm not sure how many disabled people there are in the world, but certainly there's a massive portion of those people that were not born with their disability. And I think, like Joe, I have more questions than answers in this space, but I do think there is something about in racism. There's been so many things that have hit the headlines with racism, whether that's murders, whether that's footballers, and so on and so forth. There's been quite a lot of things in the LGBTQ community that have also hit the headlines. There's a huge amount of hate crime. 2 in 5 people in the transgender community, I believe it is, have experienced a hate crime or hate speech in the last 12 months. This is really recent stuff, and I think it's 1 in 6 in the LGBT community. So as a whole, so these things are hitting the headlines. We're not seeing as many disabled issues, shall we say, hitting the headlines, with the exception perhaps of mental health, which links to the neurodiversity and mental health push. So I would say, as recruiters, going back to your point, Paul, how can we elevate the narrative before something encourages us to do that, right? So how, again, can we get ahead of that curve and start having the conversations before the masses are? Because, to be honest with you, whatever political manifestos say, we know that, well, half of them aren't worth what they suggest they are anyway, regardless of which party you support. So it's really about, as you say, Paul, what can we as recruiters in a recruitment industry start to change proactively without someone telling us we should? That's what I would.
And Jackie, I completely agree with what everybody is saying so far. And I think now actually is a really good moment to cease to do that, because there is a high level of unemployment in the disabled community, and we have a candidate shortage. So, there is a really strong argument for recruiters saying, we have a pool that we are not fishing in. What do we need to do to change our processes to make them more accessible, to have our candidates think about how they would accommodate particular disabilities, and the move to working from home and remote working and different ways of working and the use of technology for some people will have made working more accessible. And so why are we not maximizing on that? Why are we not shouting about, if you manage to move your whole workforce to working remotely, why could you not then accommodate more disabled people in your candidate pool? And what do you need to do next to maximize on the fantastic evolution and change that we've actually seen in working practices in the last 12 months? If we're going to take anything positive from what's happened in the last 12, 18 months, it's got to be that organisations managed to change because they had to really quickly. And that surely creates opportunity.
And can we chuck intersectionality, that word in the good old DE&i intersectionality word in here? We're recognising that having a disability exaggerates the social and structural inequities that already exist in society. So a person from marginalised or unprotected community who also has a disability is magnified in terms of their lack of opportunities. What we often see is we see the Invictus Games, we see Help for Heroes, we see privileged people who have huge amounts of funding, backing them and being successful. What we don't see is young Black people from communities who are wheelchair users or who are blind or whatever succeeding, because those systems aren't there for people from minority communities. So we've got to really think about when we think about people with disability. It's not just wheelchair users. There are other people there as well. It's not just white people. There are people from all ethnicities and backgrounds who have disabilities, and we've got to recognise that some of these are just not getting the support, and it's exaggerated through their other characteristics.
Yeah, and I think as well, that whole point around bringing people in with disabilities, when you take the time to get under the skin of what any individual needs, right, that's coming into your business, then you're almost, it's not being blind to the disability. The disability is important in the way in which you accommodate it, but it's recognizing that this is a human being, right? And by the way, there's research that suggests that disabled employees will be more loyal. And unfortunately, one of the reasons for that is that they struggle to get work because people don't give them and make and create the opportunities. So when they get an opportunity, so long as they're able to, like any employee, thrive and feel valued and safe and so forth, they will stay with you. They will stay with you. And I think, it is about thinking, well, beyond the traditional. So as Joe said, neurodiversity is very up there, and people are starting to realize that, people that have Asperger's or certain forms of autism and so on, yes, they need certain things, but don't we all? But also they can give something really fantastic that actually other people without those conditions can't give. Yeah. And so, it's flipping the coin all the time and thinking, well, what can this person bring to our business, bring to our organization? And also having those people, and I'll stop now, but I'm passionate about it. But, by having those people in your business, how is that going to support you, supporting your customers and grow your business? So, there's a real knock on by looking outside of the conventional box.
And I hope that the fact that we are in such a candidate short market gives more and more recruiters that little extra nudge they need to take the time to work out how they make themselves accessible to that candidate pool, what funding streams are available to help clients make, access to work, for example. I don't know if anybody has experience of using access to work, but there is funding available to support people with making adjustments. And so do your clients know about that? Are you shouting about that? Are you, is that being publicized? Do people know about it? And as Paul said, recruiters actually have a massive opportunity here to open up a pool of candidates and be agents for change with their clients.
And I'll just emphasize that client bit. On the webinar, 8 weeks ago, Bertie Tonks, HR People Director for Collinson's, who run all the airport lounges, the priority passes and everything else around the world. He talked very, very clearly about what he wants from a recruitment partner is somebody who's going to challenge the norm, somebody who's going to present solutions, somebody who's going to help him meet his business objectives. His one bit of advice to agents, all the agencies that were on that webinar, were do something different that's going to help me achieve my objectives. If all you're doing is placing somebody to make a placement fee, he said, I'm not interested in those recruiters.
Yeah, I think that's important, Paul. So just for our last, because yet again, the time has run away with us. So I'm going to very quickly just look at one other area that we haven't covered at all. And that's ex-offenders, people with convictions. So I know there's been some change that's happening currently in Scotland, for example, where they're reducing the amount of time before convictions are getting spent. So what we haven't looked at that. How do we help people with convictions back into the workplace? What might we do as organisations and as recruiters to think about those people who are often excluded from the workplace?
I've worked with a couple of people, a lady called Shelley Winner, who currently works for Microsoft in the US, and she was previously incarcerated. That's the term they use in the US, is previously incarcerated. She was on meth. She was incarcerated for many, many of her adult years. And she came out a mess, and she's reinvented herself. And she is now championing through organizations like Smart Recruiters around making employability for previously incarcerated. And I know people in this country. There's a guy called Gethin Jones who is working the prison service around offender rehabilitation, etc. So there are people and specialists out there working in this market. So if you think you want to engage with these people, there are people out there working and specialists. So I'm not specialist, but I know people who are. But I think it comes down to biases. we're judging someone, the horn effect kicks in, gap in their CV, we automatically assume if there's a gap in someone's CV, what were they doing? Where were they locked up? Where's this gap? It's about seeing through that crime. Okay, there are some red lines. There are some crimes maybe that is still unacceptable in the workplace, that you would not want to put somebody with colleagues because of safety and whatever that may be. But there are crimes that you can be rehabilitated from. They're white-collar crimes. Even people who've committed murder or violent crimes are rehabilitated, and they are employable. They've often had good training as they've gone through the criminal justice system, working with probation services, working with the services out there. You can get support. So I'm a passionate believer in, again, it's putting your bias on the shelf and just saying, okay, I know I'm biased, looking into the heart of somebody and saying, yes, this person has valuable skills, and giving them an opportunity.
Thank you. Jackie,
yeah. Well, I mentioned last week the Forward Trust. So the Forward Trust support ex-offenders as well as, homeless and previous addicts and so on. So there's a guy there called Dan Cook. I'd be happy to introduce anybody listening to Dan if you wanted to engage with him. So yeah, echoing what Joe says, without getting all biblical on it, I would say, yet he who is without sin cast the first stone. We've all made mistakes in life, and there are of course different levels of mistake, and I'm not justifying crime. I am actually, on a separate note, fascinated by crime and what makes somebody do the things that they do. And so often, especially for kind of murderers and so forth, it goes back to early life and the experience that somebody's had, and sometimes relates to injury as well. So there are many different reasons, none of which justifies the crime. But in the same way that we are all more than the worst part of ourselves, isn't that the same for other people? Joe's point about, there may be certain situations that you wouldn't have certain individuals in that have perpetrated certain crimes. But I would echo the thoughts about speaking to someone who specializes in that area and just going in with that openness. I think, again, there's that fear that the past is not the future. Right? The past does not equal the future. And I think that is a really important, if you like, presupposition to think about in life. And that kind of sums all of this up quite nicely, actually. Just because we've always done it a certain way doesn't mean we always should.
I would also just offer a piece of advice from my experience in recruitment for a very long time, is as recruiters, when you're dealing with the issue of rehabilitating offenders and employing people who've been incarcerated, be on the front foot with your clients about this issue. When you're engaging with a client for the first time, you're going to ask them about diversity targets, you're going to ask them about inclusion, ask them specifically about their own policy on employing ex-offenders, ask them about it, challenge their questioning. If you come across a candidate who has the skill set but has a conviction, would they be prepared to see them? And if not, why not? And deal with it up front, have that debate and that conversation, rather than sometime later on being on the back foot when either a candidate you've put forward tells you later that they've got a conviction, or, it's that, get on the front foot in the debate and the conversation with your clients first is what I've seen work.
It's the eat your frog, isn't it?
Yeah,
in that kind of perspective, just get it out of the way, be upfront about it. Yeah,
and I think having that conversation with a client only makes you look more consultative, makes you look more professional as a recruiter. So I just think it's great for your relationship with your client. So yet again, we have run out of time. Joanne and Jackie, I can't thank you enough for the contribution that you've made. It would be great if you could, just for 30 seconds each, and it literally is 30 seconds each, if any of the people who've been listening to any of our webinars want to get in touch with you, how do they do that? How would they find you? Joanne, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Heather. Thank you for this fantastic opportunity to be on these webinars. Best place to contact me is via LinkedIn. So linkedin.com/in/Joe Lockwood. That's always a good place to start conversation. I have my own website, which is seechangehappen.co.uk, SWE-changehappen.co.uk. And I have a weekly newsletter and also a weekly podcast episode that goes out. So please subscribe. I interview lots of fantastic people, including Jackie in the past and many other people. So I'd love to hear from you. Please do connect. And if not now, we can chat further in the future. And thank you very much.
Thanks, Joanne. Jackie.
Yeah, and I'll just echo the whole thank you. But more than having me on, thank you for talking about this. It's so very important. So the great thing about having the name handy, hope I have been, I haven't used that before, have I? Is you'll just Google me and you'll find me. So Jackie Handy. But yeah, I am on LinkedIn a lot. Please do again connect. If you want to reach out privately, then it's hello@jackiehandy.com. But honestly, just find me on LinkedIn, and it's jackiehandy.com is the website. Happy to connect, happy to have just conversations for people who are just not sure where to start. And you know, I talked about this whole blended approach around leadership and DE&I. So I think more of us should be talking about that. So if you're interested in that kind of thing as well, get in touch.
Thank you.
And leave us a recommendation. Actually, I'm just gonna put that out there.
Yes.
If you've enjoyed this, you know, Joe and I have to say, you know, we are self-employed, and a lot of my work, and I'm sure Joe's work, comes from referrals. So, you know, please, if you've enjoyed what you've heard, do that for us. It's better than any monetary payment.
Thanks,
some monetary
thanks, Joe. Thank you. And Howard, with his wonderful technical skills, will be making this webinar available on YouTube. It's been suggested in the panel that some people are sharing these with their clients, have their clients look at them to get other people talking about the conversation. So, you know, those webinars are they're all up there on YouTube. If you want to use them in your conversations with clients, we'd be delighted for you to do that. So next week I will be handing the reins back to Howard. Howard, thank you. I've loved doing this. I've loved learning a new skill. Maybe you'll let me do another one in the future. Look out on LinkedIn for the subject areas that we're going to be covering for the next 3-4 week series. It's been a joy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.